It is bizarre where what's happening in the economy is sort of like a second order issue, that to and I guess it's getting that type of attention, right? Can we just survive in this holding pattern if we do have, like, it just seems like things like, okay, they're punting, like, for instance, in New York, you can't evict somebody until June or July. I can't remember when it is. And I imagine at one point, Cuomo's going to have to say, actually, you can't evict anybody until September. And then it's conceivable in September, they're going to say you can't evict anybody till January. Like, there's all this sort of, it's like musical chairs on some level. And
and then let's take that example to the other side, right? So the people who are renting apartments to people who no longer have any income, let's say that they or their partner has already been laid off, so their income's down. So those mortgage payments aren't made. So those mortgage payments aren't made, start to go into the banks and go into the credit instruments. That impairs the credit markets even further. A big firm gets downgraded. That panics the market. Everything's connected.
And isn't there right now, I know there's a program for mortgage borrowers to punt, essentially. I think it's 3 months down the road. And I imagine they're going to extend that too. And I imagine the Fed is basically buying up a lot of those bonds, right? I mean, it's Fannie and Freddie buying in, and then the Fed's sort of financing that. And this is just...
the Fed is basically plugging the liquidity gaps. Although, as far as I know, and I could be wrong on this one, what should happen with a mortgage program is you forget 3 months and put it on the end of the loan. And what lenders are actually saying is you can forget 3 months, but you need to give us 4 months in 4 months worth of 4 months from now, which isn't doing anybody any good at all.
Right. Of course, because these guys just want their fees up front, and they don't want...
right, because they're on the hook to somebody else. Right. Because they borrowed the money from somebody else. It's this whole chain of everybody owes everybody else.
How are we going to get out of this? Let's...
With great difficulty.
Well, I'm trying to because there just seems to be this delusion that the virus is going to go away. And, you and I are not epidemiologists, but I think, like, at this point, you don't need to be, I'm also not a physicist, but I know that gravity works. And it seems to me like the virus is just not going to go away on its own until 60 to 70% of the population gets infected or there's a vaccine.
You got it.
And that's the only two things that can happen. And statistically speaking, that means we're going to have anywhere from 20 to, I guess, like 7, or maybe a little bit less, maybe 15 to like 6 or 5 times more deaths in this country, 5 times more hospitalizations, infections to get to 60 to 70%. And nobody's going to go. I'm not going to a restaurant and sitting down and trusting that, that dude over there has my best interests in, and so. But
this is when you got to break down the numbers, right? And then you got to prioritize where you put your health. So if you go to the Office for National Statistics website for the British government, and these are their official figures, and they may be undercounted, but with no reason to think that they're systematically manipulated. If you look at total deaths, it's 30,000. If you look at deaths under the age of 45, it's 400. 1/3 of all cases happen in care homes to old people. So what should you be doing? Well, this is where the Swedes look pretty good on this one. You basically keep things open and you encourage people to be smart about their interactions. And then you really try and keep old and vulnerable people safe. And then you basically try and control the spread to the level that you can keep economic activity going, keep people in jobs, but at the same time, you don't destroy your health service. It's a hell of a tricky balancing act, but it's the only one we've got. Right. And if you continue to shut down, particularly in a place where everyone depends upon wages and 40% of people live paycheck to paycheck, can't get $400 in an emergency. That emergency started 4 weeks ago. We know all the stats, right? You have to open up. But if you open up and people don't come, or if they come and then they start to do super infections and there are huge spreads and it overwhelms local health services, people get even more freaked out and withdraw even more. So this is a really tough balancing act, but ultimately it's one that we're going to have to try and pull off. And we'll try and pull it off state by state because the federal government's worse than useless.
There really does feel like the plan here is surge, pull back, surge, pull back, surge, pull back until we enough people get infected and die. And
but also we can also put it in terms of, and then if you invested in contact tracing, if you had the ability to do proper testing, then you can get those numbers down. Because the minute there's been someone's infected, you can stop the spreading event, right? You can also protect people who are way more vulnerable than others.
Right.
So yes, it's absolutely true that there's now 30 children in New York out of all the cases they have to have this weird sort of Kawasaki type syndrome of immunoresponse, right? That is horrible and tragic, and God forbid my daughter succumbs to that. But it's still a handful of people in comparison to 300 people, a million people in the United States. Right? So I don't want to play a law of numbers on this one, but you can't stay sequestered forever and expect the government just to run a printing press, because eventually the whole world will say, you know what, I don't trust the dollar anymore. We've got a long way to go before we get to that, but that is the extreme, right? And you don't want to get anywhere near that. On the other hand, if you just open it up, you blow up your economy and your healthcare service because you've got too much spread. And the only way to do this is to get into that sweet spot in the middle.
Right, which would involve having some measure of leadership, and we have, as far as I can tell, zero. I mean, we have some level of competency in some of the states, it seems to me, but there's a whole nother problem that comes with what you're talking about, this idea of being able to isolate the most vulnerable people, and that is people living in lower income situations. It's much harder, just in terms of like, how do you keep, you have families who are multi-generational households. How do you deal with that? Yeah, you have multi-generational households with people who need to actually go to work as opposed to work from home. That to me seems like, on some level, the administration must, if I can figure this out, that problem, the administration surely does. And it seems to me like they're just basically saying, you know what, most of the death is going to happen in places that we just don't really care that much about.
Let's be more generous. Let's assume that they cared. Let's ask the concrete question: what could they do? So how do you rehouse 10 million Americans within 6 months? That's a tough problem. Doesn't matter who's in there. This is what Obama said on that call that was leaked the other day. With any government, this would be a nightmare.
Right.
With this one, it's a particular nightmare.
Right.
So there's no good options to this. This is where you see all of the things that make America work, right? Which is people have to work. There are no safety nets. There are no airbags, right? Everybody's at full pelt the whole time. If you don't do it, someone else will do it cheaper, right? That creates a type of society, a series of inequalities that mean that people live close together. That means if you're living in cities and you're not a high earner, your living conditions are extremely cramped. All those things, which we kind of shrugged off as that's just the way we do business, have been exposed by this virus as being killers. One of the reasons the Swedes can get away with it is not just because they're a rich country. We're a rich country too. It's because they're a relatively equal country and most people live on their own. That's hugely important if you're going to tell people to basically voluntarily self-sequester. It's not clear how you do that in East New York. It's not clear how you do that in parts of the Atlanta burbs.
So let's assume for a moment that we do manage to get through this, by January, right? I mean, just sheer statistics, even if we do it incorrectly, 60 to 70% infection rate. I think it's like conceivable that you would get there. I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months out, maybe a little bit, maybe a little bit longer.
No, but nobody really knows because we haven't done enough tests to know what the actual rate of infection is out there just now.
Right. But I think we can sort of extrapolate, right, from what's happened in New York in terms of testing, because they're probably testing people who are more likely to be positive than not. And so we know that it's like a maximum of like 20% in the most densely populated areas, which, which means that it can be anywhere from like 5 to 15 for the rest of the country, it seems like to me. And so we're, at best 1/5 through this, at worst, maybe 1/8 through this, maybe 1/10 through it, maybe in some places
Yeah, but then what you're doing is you're doing this over an average, and like what happens is every single place will experience this in a different way from others. So you can generalize from New York, but New York's not going to tell you what's going to happen in Des Moines. It's not going to happen. If you've got a big meat packing plant, you're totally getting it. If you don't have a big meat packing plant, you might not get anything, right?
Right.
So the average is important, but it's kind of misleading as well. All we know is we need to make the following assumptions. What if there is no vaccine anytime soon? Then this thing becomes part of the furniture. We hope that you get to 60, 70%, as Angela Merkel said, but then there's still no guarantee of long-term immunity simply from exposure. So we're going to have to start rethinking how we do a lot of stuff. Now, this is where we can make this more positive, right? Let's go back to that example. I said, this isn't a war. We haven't destroyed all that capital. It's just sitting there. So it may be the case that massage envy is going to go to the wall. I think it will. It may be the case that a lot of retail is going to go to the wall. It was already on the way out, particularly in big malls. Does that mean everyone who ever worked in those sectors will never find a job again? Highly unlikely, because all of that capital will be liquidated and needs to be redeployed. What does it need to be redeployed in? Well, if we want to get through this, we're going to have to do some serious investment and changes to the way that we do healthcare, whether it's single payer or whatever system. It cannot be one that's based on private insurance tied to employment when employment collapses.
Right.
So there's lots of ways that we can think critically and positively about, this is a terrible blight and a horrible problem, but we've got a good problem because we're an incredibly rich country. We've got a bunch of capital that we can't use anymore. How do we liquidate it at the minimum cost and redeploy it into things that we need? How do we use this to further decarbonization? What new jobs can we create out of this that aren't just basically make work? Because God knows there's tons of work that needs to be done. We've been talking for 10 years about upgrading America's terrible infrastructure. Well, if now isn't the time, I don't know when is, because you're still looking at negative real interest rates on long-term debt. So get to it. What matters is leadership, and it's not just a leadership at the top and a failure of leadership at the top. It's a failure of imagination. We're so divided amongst ourselves trying to blame the other guy. We can't see the fact that there's $10 lying on the sidewalk waiting for somebody to pick it up.
Right.